Okay, hey, let's talk about medial modifiers here. Medial modifiers. We've seen lots of initial position and final position free modifiers, but in terms of diagramming and leveling, it's a little bit different when you encounter medial modifiers. So I just want to show you this, and if you watch now, I think you'll pick it up. No problem. No problem. This sentence reads like this. It says, "A spattering of skinny trees, like greedy tourists seeking all the sunshine, grew at impossible angles from the rocky cliff, dangerously reaching over the precipice." And this one's tough in terms of the base clause because it's a little different than what we've seen, but it could be true that a spattering of skinny trees grew at impossible angles from the rocky cliff. And you can see here that the base clause, it looks like it's being split into two parts. We've got this part right here. There's an interruption of the base clause, and then the base clause continues down here. And that's true. We don't have two base clauses. We simply have an interrupted base clause, and that base clause is being interrupted by a medial modifier. You'll notice that the subject and the verb are still technically right next to one another, which is a very common theme in base clauses. But that interruption occurs right between the subject and the verb, which is also common for medial modifiers. So here's where the interruption begins, right here with this mark of punctuation. And it's this mark of punctuation and this mark of punctuation, which indicates, well, there's a free modifier here. Free modifiers are separated by marks of punctuation. We have another free modifier as well. It's in the final position. It's here, and it's here, and you can see free modifiers stand out just from those marks of punctuation. And then when you add the highlighting to it, you're like, oh, that's definitely a free modifier. It could be true that, like, greedy tourists seeking all the sunshine. Like, there's something incomplete about that compared to what you get when you read the base clause. That definitely passes the "it could be true that" test because it's got the subject and the verb in it. In terms of, what do these things modify? This modifies the trees. Dangerously reaching over the precipice also modifies the trees. And this is a common theme as well, that level 2 free modifiers go back and modify the subject in the sentence. Speaking of the subject's in the base clause. So we've got base clause is always a level 1, so you can see that the pattern for this sentence begins with a 1. What's unique about it is that, again, we don't have two base clauses, so while this is a level 2 because it modifies skinny trees, it's the medial position, it's going to get that slash mark just to let people know that this is a medial modifier. It is slicing, slashing, splitting, interrupting, separating the base clause. And then we've got a final position free modifier here as well. And notice I didn't draw a second one. There's not two ones in this. This is just the continuation of the base clause. So the pattern for this is a 1, 2/2. We've got a medial position free modifier. We've got a final position free modifier. And you'll notice because the base clause, the pattern for this starts with the base clause, there's nothing that comes before it. So there is no initial position free modifier in this sentence. We've got a medial and we have a final as well. And here's where the diagramming gets tricky. So it's a little bit different. So the pattern for this is a 1, 2/2. So it begins with the base clause. And here's the first part of the base clause. And look, I'm going to click off so you can see better. But as I type the base clause here, you notice I got a spattering of skinny trees, comma. That's this comma right here. It's going to go comma, slash, comma, and then I'm going to continue the base clause. So comma, slash, comma, continue the base clause, slash, comma, and then we have grew, which is our verb. So the subject trees and the verb grew, they're next to one another, but here's where the interruption of that medial modifier occurs. Grew at impossible angles from the rocky cliff, comma. You can see it right here, comma. As far as the medial modifier, that's next in our diagram. This is a 1, 2/2. Like greedy tourists seeking all the sunshine. Now, normally after a free modifier, you might hear me say, like greedy tourists seeking all the sunshine, comma. But in this case, the commas are already being accounted for up here in this comma slash comma. So in the diagram portion, in the medial modifier, it's not going to come with a comma here. It's already up here in the comma slash comma. And then this diagram finishes with the final position free modifier. Dangerously reaching over the precipice, and then this diagram ends with a period. And then in terms of just double checking, capital letter, we have 1, 2, 3 commas and a period. Look, all the commas are in the base clause. We got 1, 2, 3 commas and the period. So this is a 1, 2/2. Here's another one. Stuck inside all day, the puppies, barking and growling incessantly, needing to release their pent-up energy, bounded wildly all over the house. This one actually has, I don't know if you can hear it. Sometimes you can hear the subject and you can hear the verb. I try to emphasize them when I'm reading. Maybe you heard it, maybe you didn't. But if you did, you probably realize, well, somebody does something or something does something in a base clause, typically. You know, what do the puppies do? They bounded wildly all over the house. And you can see this base clause, it's seriously being interrupted. Here's where the base clause begins. Here's where it continues, like 2 lines later. So, you know, what is it that's interrupting the base clause? Well, we'll get there in a second. We do have an initial position free modifier right here, stuck inside all day, probably modifies the puppies. And then we have 2 medial position free modifiers. Here's one between this mark of punctuation and this mark of punctuation. Then we have another one, it's a shared mark of punctuation. Needing to release their pent-up energy is separated by this mark and this mark. In terms of highlighting the free modifiers, you can definitely see the free modifiers now. I'm one of those people who just, I skipped a step. I skipped a step. Come back to it in just a second. And here's the puppies, and here's what they did. They bounded wildly all over the house. It could be true that the puppies bounded wildly all over the house. Who's stuck inside all day? The puppies. Who's barking and growling incessantly? The puppies. Who's needing to release their pent-up energy? Look at common theme. Level 2 free modifiers going back to modify the base clause. Speaking of the base clause, it's always a level 1. Looks like we've got a level 2 here in the initial position, modifying puppies, barking and growling, and oh, here we go. Great. This is different. This is a level 2, but as you can see, it's a medial modifier. Comes with a 2/ between this mark, and then needing to release their pent-up energy between this mark and this mark is another medial free modifier. This is a very unique pattern in that it's got 2 medial modifiers in it. It's a 2-1, 2/2/. That's fun to say. We've seen a lot of different sentence patterns so far, and it's just a reminder that, you know, if you can manipulate language and you can learn how to manipulate language however you want, you can really learn to express yourself really well and develop some style in your own writing. So this is a 2 1 2 slash 2 slash 2 slash 2 slash. Stuck inside all day, comma. This is where this is going to get interesting here with these two medial modifiers. Watch closely. The puppies as our subject, and then look. There's two interruptions here, so watch. Comma, slash, comma, slash, comma, and then the rest of the base clause. So the puppies, comma, slash, comma, slash, comma. The puppies, comma, slash, comma, slash, comma, bounded wildly all over the house. Period. All the punctuation is in the initial position free modifier and the base clause. So we've got barking and growling incessantly. Did I spell that right? E-S-S-A-N-T-L-Y. And we've also got needing to release their pent-up energy. And I think that's it. So we've got capital letter, 1, 2, 3, 4 commas in a period, 1 comma, 2, 3, 4, and here is the period. When you read this, it's going to read like this. Watch. There's some up and there's some down as well. So we've got stuck inside all day, the puppies barking and growling incessantly, needing to release their pent-up energy, bounded wildly all over the house. That's how you diagram medial modifiers. You can tell this is a medial modifier. In the diagram, it looks like these two slashes come after the base clause, which is part of the reason why there's a slash mark with the medial modifier, because if you just had this plain old 2, you can see that there's a very clear difference between this 2 and this 2 slash. They both look like they come after the base clause. This is the final position free modifier is the only one that comes after the base clause. These 2 slashes let readers know that, hey, these are medial position free modifiers. See, you can see them up here in the base clause as well. So final position, medial position, initial position.